Controlling your character is simple in Tekken. You may press towards or away from your opponent to advance or retreat, as well as double tapping in the direction to either initiate a run or to backdash away from your opponent. Since Tekken is a 3D game, you'll want to utilize this extra dimension to get the upper hand on your opponent, yet you may have tried to sidestep and ended up jumping or crouching instead. If you hold an up or down direction, you'll either jump or crouch depending on the input. To actually sidestep into the background or foreground, you must tap the up or down direction and not hold it. To continue moving in a side direction, you may double tap and then hold the second input, allowing you to walk for as long as you want. It may seem tricky at first, but with a little practice, it'll become second nature. Attacking in Tekken is very simple and intuitive when we look at the control scheme. You have 4 buttons which you may attack with, which correspond to the limbs on your character. These buttons are known as 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is called button notation, and they are labelled this way so that no matter what platform or controller that you're using, you may share moves and combos with people and they'll instantly be able to understand you. You may combine attack inputs with direction inputs, which will perform the corresponding attack in the move list. These inputs are relative to your opponent, which means that if you swap sides with your opponent, your down forward 3 attack will change from a down right 3 to a down left 3. The attacks you use can be categorized as high, middle, and low attacks. There are also a select few classified as special mid. There are 2 guarding types, a standing guard in which you hold away from your opponent, and a crouching guard in which you hold down and away from your opponent. First off, with high attacks, they may be defended against with a standing guard, or you may duck underneath them by crouching. High attacks are generally quick and come with low risk. Middle attacks must be defended against with a standing guard, as using a crouching guard will leave you vulnerable. Middle attacks are generally quite powerful and carry more risk than high attacks when blocked. Then we have low attacks, which must be defended against with a crouching guard, as a standing guard won't have you defending your legs. Lows are often riskier attacks, with even the weakest low attack leaving the attacker vulnerable when guarded. A pro tip to note here is that you may perform an action called a low parry by holding down forward just before your opponent attacks, allowing you to perform a small combo against low attacks. Special mids, which are few and far between, may also be low parried, along with being defended against with either a standing or crouching guard. Now, even if you do everything right and block all of your opponent's attacks, you still may find that certain moves seemingly damage you. This is classified as chip damage in the wider fighting game community, and this is where the recovery gauge comes into play. Your recovery gauge, represented as this white bar of health, will appear not only through chip damage when you block certain moves, but also via absorbing damage during a power crush, enduring an attack whilst knocked on the ground or in the air during a combo, or lastly whilst defending against an opponent who has activated heat. This is health that is not completely lost and may be recovered by going on the offensive and attacking your opponent. To strip away your opponent's recovery gauge, you may either use a low attack, which will deplete it proportion to the damage dealt, or use special recovery gauge depleters, which are signified by the symbol here in your character's move list. It is important to end on the note that chip damage cannot be utilized to defeat your opponent. You must actually land a strike to finish the round. There are a few unique attack properties that certain moves may have that you should be aware of. First off, there are homing moves which are utilized to catch people stepping to either side of your character. You'll find these moves in the move list dictated by the symbol. You can spot a homing move mid-match by the greenish trail that follows an attack. Next, we have power crush moves, which can absorb multiple mid and high attacks throughout its duration. They may be interrupted with a low attack or a throw attack, but more on that later. Then we have tornado moves, which when landed, allow you to follow up with a combo. The main use of these tornado moves is to extend your combos when used in the middle of a juggle combo, or known as an air combo in Tekken 8, but it's important to remember that you may only utilize them once per air combo, otherwise the combo will end. A secret property that isn't in the move list is the unblockable attack. Even if your opponent does everything correct to try and block the attack, it will still land unless physically avoided. You may see them in training mode represented by this exclamation point. Lastly, we have heat engages, which allows you to activate heat, a brand new mechanic in Tekken 8. There are two ways to activate heat, first being your heat burst, or secondly, using a heat engager attack on grounded opponents. When activating heat, your character will glow with a fiery aura, and you'll quickly notice that your heat gauge will begin to deplete. This gauge signifies how much heat you have left, and will momentarily pause when attacking your opponent. Once your heat gauge is depleted, you won't be able to interface with the system again for the rest of the round. You'll have a larger heat gauge if you activate heat through a heat engager rather than a heat burst, so keep that in mind. There are a few benefits of heat, the first being that your attacks cause chip damage on block. Secondly, you may use a heat engager move whilst having heat active, and then hold forward to perform a heat dash that begins a combo, although this will end your heat instantly. Another tool you have whilst heat is active is the heat smash attack. Heat smash is a powerful attack that will instantly end your heat. There are a few unique benefits that activating heat will have on your character, so read through the move list to see what they are. Alongside the heat system, there is also Rage. Rage automatically activates when your character's health depletes past this point in the health bar, and your character will begin glowing red. You may end Rage early by performing a Rage Art attack. The Rage Art is your character's most powerful move, and when landed, will perform a cinematic attack. In Tekken, certain moves can only be utilized during a particular stance that your character is in. There are a few generic stances that we'll cover here that apply to everyone. First off, we have our normal standing state. If you stand still or move around without entering a run, you'll be able to utilize every attack that is not attributed to any other stance. Secondly, we have your crouching state. If you hold a downward direction for a small time, you'll be able to utilize your crouching moves. Thirdly, we have our while rising state. This is the transition state from crouching to standing. You may capitalize on this stance by letting go of your crouch direction and then using a while rising attack. Next, we have while running moves. If you double tap and hold towards your opponent, you will enter a running state after a few steps, allowing you to use your character's specialized while running attack. You may skip the build up of entering a run by double tapping forward twice and then holding the third input to instantly use a while running attack. Another stance is technically your sidestep. Some attacks can only be done during your sidestep and will override other inputs that share the same button. There is a pretty niche stance for most characters, and that is your back turn stance. Some characters may voluntarily face their back towards the opponent and then utilize special back-facing moves, whilst others may end up with their back facing the opponent after an exchange and will do some generic attack to quickly turn around. Lastly, we have the jumping state. This truly is the least useful state that your character may be in, as you usually will just have access to a few generic attacks. Those were just your generic states that your character may be in, but there are some special stances your character may enter which is unique to them. Take Fang for example. Fang has access to all of your generic stances, but he also has Lingering Shadow, Shifting Clouds, and Deceptive Step. These stances allow Fang to perform unique attacks to these states, often powerful and flavorful moves. If you've been hit up into the air and you land on the ground with your feet touching the floor, which is not the same as being hit by the first tornado attack or burst attack, you can press a punch button when you hit the ground to quickly roll into the background, or a kick button to quickly roll into the foreground, thereby teching the landing and getting back onto your feet. But say you missed the tech and now you're stuck on the ground. This is the final generic stance your character has, and there is technically 4 of them. To keep things simple, majority of the time you'll be face up and have your feet towards your opponent. First things first, holding back to get up is never a terrible idea. You may also tap up to get up in place, or tap forward to roll towards your opponent, which may be combined with a 1+2 input for a roll attack. If you want to roll but you miss the tech, you still may do so by pressing 1 to roll into the background, or 1 and then hold down to roll into the foreground. You may press 3 to do a low kick, or 4 to do a middle kick. You may combine these with your forward roll to perform it afterwards. You also have access to a spring kick with a 3+4 input whilst lying on your back, or a toe kick with your down 3 input. If you are overwhelmed as a beginner, focus on trying to tech when you land to not give your opponent time to pressure you, and keep safe by holding back if you end up on the ground. Where a strike may fail to bypass a defensive opponent, a throw may open them up. Everyone has access to some generic throws with either a combination press of 1+3 or 2+4. The difference between a 1+3 and a 2+4 press is that the camera will switch on the 2+4 throw. You may break any generic throw in front of you with either a 1 or 2 press, but not both, during the beginning of the grapple animation. You also may duck pretty much all throws except for a select few. If your opponent tries to throw you from your left side, then you need to use a 1 to break it, where if your opponent attempts to throw you from the right side, you'll need to use the 2 to break it. This corresponds to the button aligned with the limb. If your opponent throws you from behind, unfortunately you won't be able to break it. If you throw an opponent who's using an armored attack that is not a rage art, they will not be able to break your throw. Characters may have a unique throw with an alternative command, which has the user perform the throw with both hands leading out at the same time, which requires a 1+2 input to break. Some other characters may have special throws which appear to be generic throws, yet require specifically either a 1 or 2 to break. You may identify these via the leading hand during the grab, in which if they lead with their left hand, you'll need to press 1 to break, and if they lead with their right hand, you'll need to press 2 to break. There are some grappling specialists like King who operate outside of these parameters and may use a throw that looks like one input but is actually another, but that is outside the scope of this beginner video. You may practice breaking throws by utilizing a character like Jin as your training dummy, and then have him use his 1, 2, and then 1+2 throw break attacks and build up your confidence breaking throws. We wouldn't have a complete picture of throws unless we talk about chain throws. Some characters like King and Nina can chain one throw into another and then possibly even more. You'll have to press either 1, 2 or 1+2 to resist the next stage of the grapple and break free. Unfortunately, you won't know which button to press as it is dictated by the opponent pressing the button to continue the chain throw. It can be frustrating as a beginner when you're being blown up by chain throws, so prioritize not getting grabbed in the first place or breaking the initial grab, which is much more readable. Avoiding enemy attacks has never been more important as it is in Tekken 8 with the introduction of the recovery gauge. Where many moves may feel overpowered and oppressive, such as certain characters' heat engages, this is only when you confine yourself to a two-dimensional plane. A quick sidestep may avoid the attack altogether. Furthermore, when it comes to movement, you should practice moving around and getting comfortable with the options available to you. You may go very far in Tekken by backdashing once or twice, causing your opponent's attack to whiff and then attacking them in their vulnerable state. It used to be almost mandatory that you would have to learn a concept called Korean backdashing in Tekken, which is when you cancel the backdashing animation with the down back input, allowing you to quickly input only one back input afterwards for faster retreats. But now Tekken 8 has buffed the recovery speed of all backdashes. In Tekken, we know that there are categories for our moves such as high, middle and low, but this categorization also applies to our attack's evasive properties. This is where Tekken's crush system comes into play. Some moves have the ability to crush a category of attacks, making you invincible to that category for a specific duration. Take for example Paul's hop kick. When you use this hop kick attack, you are completely immune to low attacks whilst you are in the air. Please remember that attacks can only crush high and lows. There are very evasive attacks that contort the body to dodge many middle attacks, but nothing technically crushes a middle attack, at least to my knowledge. In Tekken, you'll have moves that require a series of button presses that then will perform a string of attacks. This is commonly just referred to as a string. When you practice using your strings, you may notice that whilst in training mode a string will say that it's a 3-hit combo, but your opponent may be able to block it in a real match. To test whether or not a combo is true, you can set the practice dummy to block all after the first attack, and then test the validity of your string. Strings may actually be a true combo, or have different effects on a counter hit, such as a knockdown or a launch, so experiment in practice mode. So I just mentioned the launch effect, which does exactly what it sounds like. In Tekken, the main combos are air combos, or formerly known as juggle combos, which begin after you launch your opponent into the air. You may strike your opponent several times in the air, with each hit dealing less damage and pushing your opponent further and further away from you. You can perform a tornado move once in the middle of your air combo to bounce your opponent, allowing you to catch up to them and continue your combo. If you happen to utilize a heat engager in the middle of your combo, you can bound your opponent once more, allowing you to do extended and devastating combos. The outcome of your battle may change heavily depending on the environment that it takes place in. You can see what the hazards are when you load into the stage. In practice mode, you'll be able to see which attacks may cause the effects at the wall by this symbol here. These environmental effects won't count towards your bound limit, but they also won't reset it. Speaking of walls, we have wall combos. To keep things relatively straightforward for a beginner, there are two main wall splats that you should take note of: a high wall splat and a low wall splat. You may splat your opponent against the wall with the moves that we mentioned before, as well as tornado moves and launches. You can do a small combo on your opponent at the wall, in which they slump down quicker and faster with every hit. High wall splats allow you to get a little extra output with your combos compared to low wall splats. You may re-splat your opponent with a tornado move once, and you can also use heat burst moves to bound your opponent at the wall. You would have noticed in Tekken that there are some attacks which are slower than others, leading them to be interrupted or otherwise known as being counter hit. In Tekken, the speed of a move is tied to a value, such as Jin's one jab being 10 and his hop kick being the value of 15. These values are otherwise known as frames and are just a way for the game to express the speed of a move, with the lower the value, the quicker the move. First off, for most characters, the quickest move in the game is 10 frames. And that means if two people were to utilize a 10 frame move at the same time, they would trade blows. If one person was to use a 12 frame move and the other was to use a 14 frame move, the 12 frame move would land first. It becomes slightly more complicated just when you've hit your opponent. Some moves, when you land them, will give you advantage, putting you in a state that you can attack before your opponent can, which is known as plus frames. You may act that many frames sooner than your opponent, allowing you to utilize moves more safely. Alternatively, if your move has led you to be minus frames, such as having a strong low attack blocked, you'll be in such a disadvantageous state that you'll be acting that many frames later than your opponent, and your opponent may be able to move and attack before you can even block. To make things extra tricky, you have a frame value for ending leg based on if you strike the opponent, and a different one if it's a counter hit. As a beginner, just play around with the frame data option and see if you can find some fast moves that you like, ideally around 10, 11 and 12 frame, and focus on incorporating them into your gameplay. Now back to punishment. So long as you are within striking distance, if you block a move that your opponent utilizes that leaves them, say, negative 14 frames in block stun, you may utilize the move with 14 frames of startup or lower to strike them back. You may read or hear people discussing things such as 10 frames, 13 frames or launch punishes, and what this means is that these are suitable attacks to retaliate against an opponent with a corresponding frame value. A launch punisher is generally a 15 frame move that begins your juggle combo, such as a hop kick. It is important to get accustomed to both your character's standing and while rising punish options, as you'll need to be able to punish things from a standing state as well as a crouching state. You are never expected to know every frame in the game, or even that many at all, but you should learn what the key moves are of your character and if they're safe or unsafe, and then try challenging blocked attacks with the quickest move and then ramp up the punishment if something works. Tekken is overwhelming for many beginner players, but it is this depth that it provides that is deeply incredible to the game. With hundreds of attacks, unique character interactions, multiple stage hazards, slow motion victories and dancing bears, Tekken has never been easier to get into. Thanks for watching. All of my subscribers and any new subscribers will have a 2-month buff to their Tekken learning ability, so that you can memorize the optimal combo just that little bit faster. Bye!